Well, hello again, everybody. This is John Norris at Trading Perspectives. As always, we have our very good friend, Sam Clement. Sam, say hello.
Hey, John.
You doing okay today?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. A lot has changed recently in the news, and for a long time, all we were doing was talking about COVID-19, the pandemic, and how life was going to change. But, a few weeks ago, due to the death of George Floyd up in Minneapolis, seems as though the headlines have shifted a little bit away from COVID-19 and more towards societal unrest and protests and even riots in some instances, although the rioting seems to have calmed down by this point. And now we're increasingly reading more and more about defunding police forces across the country. And so this is a very interesting concept to me because I'm not exactly sure if the people behind the defund movement are all singing from the same song sheet, because I have read some people talking about transforming it. That's what defunding means. And then I've read even some people talking about disbanding police forces just in general. And I think the truth is probably someplace in between. But it does bring up a sticky wicket, really. Defunding the police, exactly what does that mean? What does that mean in the psyches or the mindsets of the people that live in these jurisdictions, and then the corporations which are headquartered there, Because you and I have talked about it ad nauseum in the past, or seemingly so. There are three characteristics of all well-functioning economies.
Strong rule of law.
Strong rule of law is one. Another one is strong individual property rights. And the third is the development of human capital. If you dismantle your law enforcement agencies, dismantle them, if that's the extreme we're going to in terms of the defunding movement, Sam, you do away with the top two out of the three that I think are characteristics that I think are essential for having a strong economy. You do away with the rule of law because you're not enforcing it, and then you're doing away with strong individual property rights because, well, you're not enforcing the law.
Well, I 100% agree with you on that, but I think generally what most of these people are talking about is either some mixture of reforming what that money is used for, and maybe still within the police force, or just using a portion of it. I've seen figures thrown out of Minneapolis police budget is, I think, around $1.3 billion a year, and they were first talking about taking $200 million away from that. So maybe, I don't know what the $200 million would be used on. I don't know if it would be further training for police, which I guess it probably wouldn't if they're taking it away. But just what that is used for. And, we've talked about how economic crises can make things more efficient and kind of reform how we've done things and get away some of the excess that we've had. And maybe this is something that we can do with the police forces going on and become more efficient with what's going on and maybe better training in some areas or what have you. So, that at the end of the day, there's so many different proposals being thrown out that it's kind of hard to nail one down.
Well, one of the things that I have noticed about this is even in Minneapolis, there's no clear understanding of exactly what defund the police force means. The mayor's office, Fry, I believe his name is, it says he's not going to get away with the police force. And then there are members of the city council who are saying that's exactly what I intend to do. And council members such as Lisa Bender and some others that can't come up with a good answer when someone says, when people have asked her, what happens if there are fewer cops and people don't respond to domestic violence situations in a timely fashion and what have you? And there is no good answer for that. It's very difficult. And one of another example that I've read from people that are all for the defund movement is how a place called Camden, New Jersey, which is actually where Campbell's Soup is headquartered. And I think my family might be one of the last consumers of Campbell's Soup products. Had some the other night, matter of fact. But talking about how I think it was in 2012, they've actually disbanded their police force. Absolutely, completely got rid of it due to a lot of the same type problems that we're seeing with police brutality and overhandedness and just kind of thuggish behavior by the city cops. And, proponents of defund are saying, look at what Camden did. Look at what Camden did. Well, Camden didn't get rid of policing the city of Camden. All they did was they didn't run it any longer. They essentially gave over the policing of the city of Camden to the county of Camden, and so now they pay the county to help police their own jurisdiction. So it's not really quite an apples to apples comparison when you're sitting there saying Minneapolis, defund your police department. Well, who are you going to turn it over to? St. Paul? You're going to turn it over to whatever county is there? And how many of these cities themselves that are talking about defunding or disbanding their police departments are saying, well, we're going to let another jurisdiction take it over? Frankly, I think it shows a lot of strength by the city of Camden to say, we can't do this ourselves. We're going to get the county to come do it. Because the county of Camden looks a whole lot different than the city of Camden does.
Sure.
And I'm not going to go into all the demographic details about it, but it looks a lot different than the city does. And I've really kind of questioned whether or not there is a stomach for that by a lot of city councils and mayors and city managers to say, we're no longer going to be in charge of our policing, our constituency, but we are going to give that responsibility to another government entity outside of our control. Sam, what do you think the prospect for that is really?
Well, I think it can go two different ways, and those are obviously two very different ways. And one is things can get a lot worse if they're not capable of handling it. And the other is, like we talked about, or like I mentioned, that things could maybe get more efficient and things could be better down the road. But I think it's such an interesting topic that people are discussing taking funds away, because we talk about education, and a lot of people think we need more funding to fix the problems that we have. We talk about healthcare, and people will discuss we need more funding for it. There's not enough money to go around for it. And this is an area that I think most people would probably agree that there's some flaws in. And I think people are turning the complete opposite way and wanting to defund and kind of take money away from what may be too little training already for some of these departments. So it remains to be seen what this would even look like and what route it would go, if things would get better or what they would spend that reformed money on.
Well, actually, what is interesting about the Camden example is what they found. In order to save money, in order to police more effectively, they truly did have to get rid of their entire police force because it was unionized.
Right.
And so they couldn't get rid of a portion of it. They couldn't theoretically get rid of the bad cops.
Sure.
Because it was all part of a union contract. So in order to get around the union contract and get better policing or whatnot, they actually had to disband the entire force, nullify the contract with the police union, and then move on to something else, meaning that there are a lot of union jobs that all of a sudden went up in smoke. And again, it's very interesting to see, frankly, that it's primarily the Democratic Party that is for this defunding. And the best way of defunding it is getting rid of union jobs in a lot of ways. And unions have typically been more pro-Democratic Party. And it seems to me to be really kind of a very interesting situation where you have unions and then you have Democratic political forces operating at loggerheads with one another.
Yeah, it is it's an interesting area. And unions, I mean, in my opinion, there can be a lot of downside to unions. It can protect jobs that maybe shouldn't be protected and increase inefficiencies in those markets. I think that's a pretty nice way to put it, is that it can create some inefficiencies by, not lining up supply and demand and not forcing people to be the best at their job in some instances. So it is interesting to see the headbutting between the two, between the party who's usually been very pro-union and some of these police unions.
Yeah, and kind of shifting a little bit away. Minneapolis and Minnesota in general has always been a very liberal state, very Democratic stronghold, and it's kind of interesting that this would happen really in Minneapolis. That the emphasis for this, the straw that broke the camel's back or whatnot, leading to all this disquiet and really protesting, and some of it very valid. And the defunding movement comes from such a liberal section of the country, but at the same time, Minneapolis has been a pretty well-functioning city, although people in Minneapolis might not believe it themselves. But Minneapolis is a relatively stable state. It's a relatively prosperous state. They do a pretty good job educating their citizens. Minneapolis has not been sort of a shrinking Detroit or something like that.
I've been up there a few times. It's a pretty nice city.
Yeah, it's a pretty nice place. So it'll be interesting to see how they handle this defunding and disbanding. But when I start reading about cities like Baltimore, which are already struggling with crime significantly and already struggling with a loss of businesses and a loss of population from the city itself, not necessarily Baltimore County, but Baltimore City, and I see that they're thinking about defunding police forces, I'm thinking that the margin of error in some of these cities talking about doing this is so small
Right.
that they run a real risk of defunding or disbanding or somehow reducing the amount of cops on the beat or whatnot could, if it leads to any sort of increase in crime whatsoever, it's going to have major negative ramifications for those cities or those jurisdictions because, again, going back to the three characteristics of a well-functioning economy are adherence to the rule of law and strong individual property rights
Right.
are two out of the three.
Right. And those two are going to kind of be up in question.
Yeah, without a doubt. So, here we are. I'm Gen X, kind of one of the older members of Gen X, born in 1968, and you were Gen Z.
Yep.
And I'm not exactly sure if we're necessarily trading perspectives on the defunding movement, but I would tell you, Sam, with all of what we have seen and the protests and the reasons behind the protests, I think you would have to either be kind of foolish or, in my estimation, this is a generational thing, you either have to be kind of foolish or have your heart made of stone to not think that some reform is necessary.
Right. I don't think hopefully anyone's arguing against that. It's about the best way to go about doing that is where, I mean, I have not come across anyone arguing that the police force as a whole is perfectly fine the way it is. I mean, things need to get better in a lot of areas, and this is one that I think probably should be focused on right now is getting better, and it's just a question of how do we go about doing that. And I'm honestly, if we want to take a little bit of the budget and maybe reform what we're spending that on, maybe within the police force or in a way to expand their efficacy and just a more efficient workforce. I'm fine with that.
Yeah, because it's like the answer doesn't necessarily have to be more guns and more bodies. Right. The answer could be fewer.
Sure.
But if it's fewer, what we might have to do is be willing to pay our cops a little bit more and train them a whole heck of a lot more.
Yeah.
And you could have
more expensive per training.
Each individual policeman might be more expensive and better trained, but they might be that much more effective in somehow gathering the community's trust.
Sure.
And so perhaps that's the ultimate issue with the defund is not necessarily defund and disband, which is somehow the message is coming across that that's kind of what they're talking about, but restructure the police might be a better message. For me, a Gen Xer, hearing this, I'm thinking restructure it, retrain, pay people a better wage if that's what you need to do in order to get a higher caliber person interested in policing your
maybe
your
a less
area.
Unionized workforce. So maybe less unionized, higher quality workers, more training, and more focus on de-escalation and what have you to just create a more efficient, safer, better workforce within the police community.
Absolutely no arguments there, and I think maybe we would not be trading perspectives if we said defunding might not be the message that needs to get across. Transforming or something along those lines might be a better way of doing it, because the message that's coming across, at least to a person like me, that is we're trying to get rid of cops, and I don't think that's a good thing. However, you sit there and say we want to have a more efficient, better police force that is not as thuggish, I can support that all day long.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's any generational differences there at all.
No, I don't think so.
So maybe we aren't trading perspectives.
Guess not.
But the goal is, ultimately, guys, regardless of where you stand politically, on what side of the aisle or what side of the argument you are on this it is to ensure that the communities have adherence to the rule of law and strong individual property rights. And, is it more cops on the streets, some of them being thuggish, or is it fewer cops but better cops?
Yeah.
And I think that's really kind of the issue here.
Yeah, I would agree.
So with that, guys, thank you all so much for listening. We love to hear from you all. So if you have any questions or comments, please let us know. You can always send us an email to tradingperspectives@oakworthcapital.com, or you can leave us a review on the podcast outlet of your choice. If you're interested in hearing more or reading more of what we have to say, you can check out our blog, Common Sense, at oakworthcapital.com underneath the Thought Leadership tab, along with a bunch of other good articles, including the New Normal series that we are still working on here at Oakworth Capital Bank. Sam, give you a last shot.
That's all I got.
That's all I've got today, too. Y'all take care.